Hey, what's up folks? How's it going? This is Waj. So this is going to be the three-way battle of the round smartwatch. So on one side, we have the brand new Pebble Time round. This is basically the Pebble Time we encountered a couple of months ago, but in a circular formation, versus one of the most popular Android Wear device, the Moto 360 second generation. And last but not least, we have the Samsung Gear S2, which is probably one of the most advanced and stylish looking smartwatch that you can get out there. So what we're going to do is take a look at the capabilities and feature sets of all three smartwatches to determine which one is going to be the best choice for you. So if you're interested, let's get right into it. Now these days you definitely have a lot of choices when selecting a smartwatch. So specifically for the Moto 360 second generation, we have the 42mm version, and for the Pebble Time we're using the watch that comes with the 20mm strap option, and lastly we're testing out the classic version of the Samsung Gear S2. Now physically side by side in terms of the watch face size, pretty much all three of these smartwatches are kind of the same vicinity, so there's not really a huge difference between them. But once you start looking at the profile, you'll definitely notice that the Pebble Time round is very thin, only measuring about 7.5 millimeters, versus the other ones are around 12 to 11 millimeters in terms of its thickness. Additionally, the Pebble Time round is very light, only measuring about 28 grams versus the Gear S2 measures about 55 grams, and the Moto 360 with the strap measures around 65 grams, so it's a little bit heavier than the other two. Now, one thing you'll notice straight off the bat is how huge the bezel is on the Pebble Time. The actual display only measures about 1 inch, which only occupies about 2/3 of the entire watch face, so it definitely doesn't look as sleek and as modern as the other two smartwatches that have large overall displays relative to the bezel size. But there is a little bit of charm to the Pebble Time's design. Again, Pebble is one of those companies that doesn't take its design too seriously. They want to make it a little bit geeky and a little bit fun, and although it still illustrates those design cues that has made Pebble kind of famous, I still would have liked to have a larger display with thinner bezels. Now in terms of actual display technology, the Moto 360 second generation has a 1.35 inch display that has a pixel per inch count of about 263, and it's using LED LCD based technology. So although it's pretty good in terms of brightness and overall color rendition, it doesn't kind of stay on all the time, and the black levels aren't as good as the screen that we have on the Gear S2, which is the organic LED technology, and it's a 1.2 inch display that has a higher pixel density of 302 ppi. And in terms of fidelity and viewing experience, I think the Gear S2's display is probably the best out of this lineup over here. Now the Pebble Time round is actually using a color e-paper display, which has a couple of benefits, certainly when it comes to battery life. And although the battery life isn't stunning on this thing, it definitely makes it more power efficient. One of the cool things about having a display like this is that you don't always need to have the backlight on in order to see the display itself, so it's pretty much on all the time. Now funny enough, the PPI is very similar to what you get with the Moto 360. Obviously in terms of color fidelity, you're certainly not going to get the range of colors you're going to find on a traditional LCD display. You're limited to rendering about 64 different colors, which is perfectly fine from a functional standpoint. But of course there's always going to be a trade-off when you're using a display like this. Basically you don't get the same kind of viewing experience as you would expect to find with a traditional LCD or OLED display, but it's on all the time and it's going to be a lot more power efficient. Now the internal specifications are laid out right in front of you. Basically on the Moto 360 second generation, it's using a Snapdragon 400 chip clocked around 1.2 gigahertz. It's a quad core CPU, and it has Adreno 305 graphics as well as 512 megabytes of RAM and 4 gigabytes of internal memory. Now the Gear S2 is actually quite similar in terms of overall specification, except it's using a custom Exynos 3250 chip, which is a dual core processor clocked around 1 gigahertz. Now comparatively, the internal specs are not that impressive on the Pebble Time round. It's specifically using a single core Cortex M4 processor, and it has about 128 kilobytes of RAM, and in terms of internal memory, you have about 128 megabytes for all your applications, which again doesn't sound like much, but when you actually use the Pebble Time round, just like every other Pebble Time watch, everything is extremely snappy, just as responsive as any contemporary smartwatch with a quad-core processor, and that's specifically because the hardware and software are specifically designed for each other, and the operating system that the Pebble Time runs on is extremely resource light, so it's perfectly designed for the specific amount of memory that it has, so you have no problems in terms of actual real-world performance and real-world day-to-day usage on the Pebble Time. Now, all three of these smartwatches will actually track track your day-to-day fitness related activities, whether that be actually measuring how many steps you've taken throughout the day or measuring your heart rate, with the exception, of course, that the Pebble Time does not have a heart rate monitor, unlike the other two watches. Now, of course, at this point, we have to mention that all three of these smartwatches are using different operating systems. We're using the Pebble OS version 3 on the Pebble Time Round, which gives you a lot of capabilities in terms of getting your notifications. There's also the timeline interface that can kind of organize your day throughout a specific time periods. And in terms of the apps library, it's slowly growing. It's very similar to the app selection that we have on the Gear S2, but it's not as large as what we find on Google Android Wear. Now, Android Wear running on the Moto 360 second generation hasn't really changed much from the original Moto 360 or any other Google Android Wear device. It's pretty simple and straightforward. It's mainly a conduit for your Android-based smartphone. Now, in terms of compatibility, both the Pebble Time Round and the Moto 360 second gen are compatible with the iOS platform and the Android platform, which is excellent and fantastic. Pretty much opens it up to most of the smartphone users out there. And the Gear S2 does work on regular Android smartphones running 4.4 or newer, and you have to have at least 1.5 gigabytes of RAM available as well. Now, keep in mind that if you do use a regular Android smartphone with the Gear S2, some of the app integration isn't that great. For example, my email doesn't really work properly. You can't really respond to certain messages, which is definitely a bummer. Ideally, if you want the Gear S2, you kind of have to have a Samsung smartphone as well to have the best overall experience. And with a Samsung smartphone, the Gear S2 really shines. Furthermore, there are some rumors out there that there might be some compatibility options in the future for iOS platforms. At this point, that hasn't happened, but it'd be cool to see that in the future. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is the battery performance. In terms of actual capacity, the Moto 360 has a 400 milliamp hour battery. It's the largest of the other two. 250 milliamp hour battery is what we have on the Gear S2, and we have only 56 milliamp hour battery on the Pebble Time Round, which is really, really small. Now, in order to actually test the real world battery performance, I basically use each smartwatch for about 7 days, and I just measured the amount of hours that it took to get from 100 to 0%. So here you're looking at a chart of the average discharge time on each smartwatch after a couple of days of usage. And you can see, even though the Pebble Time has a very small capacity battery, because it's using very power efficient hardware, you're getting around a solid 2 to 2.5 days of usage, which is excellent. On the Gear S2, which is in second place, we get about 23 hours, and the Moto 360 second generation was definitely more power hungry. It lasted for about 20 hours on average after the couple of days of usage. So even with that small capacity battery, the Pebble Time Round is still the king of battery performance. Of course, it's nowhere near as good as the original Pebble Time, which lasts over a week's usage. And that is definitely the leader when it comes to battery performance on a smartwatch. But really, other than that, guys, that's really it. Hopefully this video helped you out in any way. Check out the description for more detailed information about each product that we talked about. And definitely let me know which smartwatch you guys think has the most to offer. And soon we're actually going to have a best smartwatch of the year video coming out very, very soon. Check out the description down below if it hasn't come out already. And in the meantime, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more cool content like this. And thank you again for your support, and we'll see you later. Take care.